Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's having a wonderful conference. I certainly wish I could be there in person. My name is Kevin O'Brien, and I'd like to talk today about developments within the Open Access to GTS or OpenGTS project. And before I start, I would just like to recognize my colleagues on the slides who have been involved in the OpenGTS in various projects over the past few years. So for those that may not be familiar with the GTS, it's the Global Telecommunications System, and it's basically the data exchange capability for the WMO Information Service, or the WIS. The general idea is that data are exchanged in near real time on the GTS. Operational centers are hooked to this service and are able to download the data and integrate it into their weather forecast and safety of life to sea forecast, hopefully making them more accurate. So it's very critical to have data flowing onto the GTS. Much of this work was done under the GOOS Observations Coordination Group, or OCG. Now, OCG is kind of responsible for the coordination of the global ocean observing networks, and one area of coordination is real-time data flow from those networks. So several years ago, we were approached with a couple problems, one being that there are observations being measured out on the ocean and the seas that are not making it onto the GTS, and therefore not making it into the forecast models. There was also sort of a lack of widespread access to these GTS data streams. It can be difficult to get data that's on the GTS. So the Open Access to GTS was developed to kind of improve this data exchange in near real time and also make the data more accessible, particularly to non-operational users. So I won't dwell on the details of the pilot projects or what came afterwards or the development of the OpenGTS implementation plan, but I will quickly show you the workflow that developed through the process. So basically, observing platforms on the left, you can see their data is downloaded into local services that is served by ERDDAP services. These services are then crawled by a data center to harvest the information, encode it, and send it onto the GTS. The opposite is done to provide access to data on the GTS. That data is pulled off, decoded by the data center, and then ingested into ERDDAP services, making it available to users, to user scripts, and to different software to use this information. You can see that the ERDDAP service is a very important part of this process, and I won't talk in detail about ERDDAP, but if you are looking to serve data and want to become more compliant through your data access services, fair compliant that is, I suggest looking into ERDDAP as a possible path to reaching that goal. Some of the benefits of the OpenGTS workflow really focus on the users and the data providers. For data providers, and it provides a simpler way for them to make their data available for harvesting. So there's no real format requirements as long as you can put it into an ERDDAP service, which supports many different formats. That data can be harvested and put onto the GTS. And the good news about that is you can also use those same data services that would feed this GTS harvesting to actually directly serve their communities. In terms of access, even operational data providers have struggled to support buffer-only data coming on the GTS, which can cause downstream effects for products such as the World Ocean Database. Using ERDDAP services will allow harvesting data directly without the need for complicated translations from buffer to other formats. So users that aren't familiar with that can still use and benefit from the GTS data. So the OpenGTS project framework, it does allow users to access the data without the need for reformatting, just to be able to access and use. So we've successfully been using the OpenGTS workflow to put autonomous data from sail drones onto the GTS and even developed a buffer template to do so. But the conversations came, what other data could potentially be out there for use? And several years ago, back when JCOM was still existed, Tom Cuff was the head of the services area. And in various different data management meetings, we would engage in casual discussions about AIS data, because many of these AIS systems have metadata, and there's lots of ships out there with these AIS systems. And Tom would say, man, this is a wealth of data. Could we use OpenGTS to send this data around? And yes, we could do that. So eventually we started talking about this more detail back in 2020 with Army Corps, U.S. Army Corps, Brian Tetreualt and Greg Johnson and Dan Figurskey. And we developed a plan to put the data from AIS systems onto the GTS. So the workflow is very similar to what I showed earlier. The data comes from the AIS system as a log file, which gets sent to the PMAL local, NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory local storage. There's a little bit of processing on that to turn that log file and pull the relevant information out of that log file into a file that can then go into the ERDDAP services. That ERDDAP service is harvested and encoded by NOAA's National Data Buoy Center and sent on to the GTS. Now, again, the great part about this is for those that don't have direct access to the GTS, they can actually access the same information going on to the GTS, but through ERDDAP services automatically. And another thing to note is that the data format we used was CSV. This wasn't a complicated format. It was quite straightforward to use. So here's a couple examples from the Yorktown Express and the Maersk Atlanta of the data through this process that was put onto the GTS and showing air pressure data. And there you can see the list of dozen or so ships that we are working with at this point. So what is next? As part of this AIS pilot, one of the things we want to do is follow the data. We want to see how the data gets through the ingestion services and the operational services, and how is it used in these processes. And we think this will be a really interesting part of the feedback to understand how in situ data is used or not used in the operational processes. There's also a potential to extend this to other commercial and third-party data, non-VOS data, some commercial ships or other autonomous platforms. And been talking about enlisting other OpenGTS partner nodes who might have an interest of using this framework to put data onto the GTS. And I've had some discussions with NOAA's Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Lab and the Marine Institute in Ireland. Some of you may have heard about the UN Decade of Ocean Science. OpenGTS has an important role to play there, I believe. We actually hosted a UN Decade satellite activity in September of 2021 that was pretty well attended to give folks an introduction who may not be aware of OpenGTS and what it could do. There's potential intersections with several UN Decade programs, projects, and activities, including the Digital Twin Oceans, Ocean Info Hub, IODE, Odyssey, Oasis, Coast Predict, etc. In fact, OpenGTS was selected as a NOAA-endorsed project for the UN Decade and was sent for approval this past January. We're also working with the World Ocean Database Cloud to provide a near real-time chunk of data for the most recent 3 months through their data services. So this would work as very similarly, where the data would be harvested from an ERDDAP service and ingested into the World Ocean Database Cloud, which would mean that users would have access to the most recent 3 months along with this historical data from the World Ocean Database. Be remiss if I didn't mention how OpenGTS was involved with WIS 2.0. So the WIS 2.0 is the evolution of the WO information service. It's really an effort to improve the way data is exchanged globally in near real time. Some of the issues with GTS that I mentioned earlier, we recognize that those are issues and how can we solve them. So the OpenGTS is involved in 2 ways. It's been officially designated as one of the pilot projects, demonstrator projects to pilot and improve data exchange. But OpenGTS services are currently involved in a pilot with DWD in Germany to test exchange of sail drone and ship data via WIS 2.0 protocols. And so the interesting thing is the OpenGTS is uniquely positioned to ease exchange through the current WIS infrastructure, because that's still required, but doing it in a way that is compatible with WIS 2.0. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope you have a great conference.